Tony Katz.
It's Kendall and Casey.
The Amber and Nigel show.
All right, well, when does your show start? Do we know? I feel like I've been promoting this for 9 years now.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
It is Friday, and this is the Tony Kinnett Cast on WIBC 93.1, and I am Stephen Kent, guest hosting once again for the great Tony Kinnett, who is not with us today, but don't worry, he'll be back on the job next week. Now, we need to get right into the news roundup. We have a packed show for you tonight. I want to begin with the fading hopes of impeachment against President Biden amongst the House Republicans. Big story over in Axios leading this evening. House Republicans, quote, don't see it going anywhere substantive, and they are not near close enough to having enough GOP votes to impeach the president. After all, they did just bring an impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas over his botched handling of the U.S. southern border in his capacity as, head of national security. But the fact of the matter remains that there is a lot of skepticism among House Republicans about the legitimacy of high crimes and misdemeanors being committed by the president. The politics of impeachment are tricky, and it is slipping away from the House. I don't expect, and you shouldn't expect either, for the House to bring forward an impeachment this year. The best strategy, folks, is to get out there and win the November election, period. Democrats reduced the act of impeachment to being political theater and a stunt with 2 House impeachments that they could not actually turn into convictions in the U.S. Senate. And while it is tempting for Republicans as a matter of political retribution to return the favor against Joe Biden, the case is still the same. They will not be able to get a Democrat-led Senate to convict Joe Biden of anything, whether or not it has to do with money from Burisma, China, Hunter Biden, laptop stuff, or murder. It's just not going to happen. So why not focus on something more practical? Let's turn over to another story. This is over at the Daily Wire from reporter Cassie Dillon. Google is having a really bad week after the botched rollout of its AI Gemini tool. This is a photo generation tool where you punch in a prompt and then it gives you, an image result. It's really cool, except for the fact that it does not allow for the production of images of Caucasians, white people. This has been pretty funny and pretty sad for Google. They have had to withdraw their Gemini tool after users were able to find out that no matter what you asked this thing, it could not possibly generate for you images of white Vikings. And even if you tried to give it the most obvious prompt possible, hey, Gemini, give us pictures of people who can't dance or jump very high, it would still not give you images of Caucasian people. It went so far as to refusing to generate images if you asked the AI to generate a picture of a white family. And you know what? Fine. Let's not even assume malicious intent for just a moment, and we'll say, all right, they're going to fix the AI tool. They'll retool it so that it is not overplaying, the diversity card and basically resulting in the erasure of the existence of white people on their tool. Maybe they'll fix it, but they've got other problems. This report by Cassie Dillon at the Daily Wire reveals that the company has been dealing with several instances of anti-Semitism in recent months, including finding the words "kill all Jews" found written inside the bathroom wall of one of its offices. A Jewish employee was also assaulted by anti-Israel protesters outside one of their campuses. There's been a lot of internal uproar within Google after the words "Free Palestine, Kill All Jews" was then scribbled on a flyer inside Google's Chelsea office in New York City. Now, this concern over anti-Semitism within the ranks of Google, this comes as their are being shown to have an overcommitment, if you will, to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which remarkably always comes at the expense of Jews in the left's hierarchy of race and oppression. Now, Google has looked into this incident. They have confirmed to the Daily Wire that there are internal investigations going on to find out what is happening. But, this isn't a fluke. This isn't a one-off. Google's AI chatbot generator, if you ask it to give details and an account of what happened in Israel on October 7th regarding Hamas, it doesn't have much to tell you. You can ask it whether or not there were violent rapes that occurred against Jews in Israel by Hamas, and it will tell you that there is no, quote, definitive proof and that the issue is complicated. The same goes for if you ask it prompts regarding Tiananmen Square in China and the crackdown of political dissidents there. This is very concerning, and it is all part of a troubling trend within big tech because technology is a reflection of the people who make it, and their values, or their lack of values, will show up in the technology that they create. So we hope that Google has learned their lesson. We hope that they will do better. And the last thing for you, a little bit of political philosophy. Twitter is aflame today with discussion of natural law and natural rights and whether or not it is antithetical to the American vision of freedom. So this is a fascinating debate, which you're going to learn more about right after the break. But over on MSNBC, Politico journalist Heidi Prisbala was speaking with the panel about a report that she wrote for Politico about Christian nationalism and Donald Trump's desire to fill his next administration with these so-called Christian nationalists. But what are the scary beliefs that these people have? Here's it in her words.
One thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God.
Yikes. I have got a lot more to say about this, and I will bring it to you right after the break. I'm Stephen Kent, and you're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on WIBC. Stay with us.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
And we're back. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast. I am Stephen Kent filling in for Tony, and I've got a message for you. It's that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. Radical idea here. These are the words of Thomas Jefferson. You might know him, if not from school or college, then from at least the Hamilton musical by Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's a crazy idea that human beings are equal and have rights that do not come from a king, a queen, a president, or the expert class. Even more radical, among these rights are life, political liberty, and pursuing your happiness. I mean, this is crazy stuff. Here you have revolutionary words claiming that a king cannot just imprison and kill you because he woke up on the wrong side of the bed, that your right to exist is not subject to the mood of your rulers. And these rights, oh man, they are self-evident. The radicalism continues here. Something that is self-evident does not need scientific testing to be proven or justified. I have 10 fingers. You, dear listeners, are not dogs or cats. You're human beings. And that's why you're able to be listening to me right now. No one has to prove it. Today, I made lunch for my 13-year-old daughter. Now, a parent can feed their child without permission from the city council, social services, or Congress. They may not, however, poison them. But stay with me here. Stay with me very closely. Would it only be morally wrong to do so because the law says it? because murder is illegal? If your answer is no, it is wrong regardless of the law of the land, then you might believe in this thing called natural law. And if you were to believe in such a radical notion, Heidi Prisbala of Politico said on MSNBC just last night that you would qualify as a Christian nationalist.
The one thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God.
Oh boy, Politico, please come get your girl. Heidi, what are you even saying? Now, this comes in the wake of an article that she wrote in Politico about Donald Trump surrounding himself with Russell Vought of the Center for Renewing America. Politico outlines in their article that Vaught's radical Christian nationalism is going to be at the heart of Trump's second administration, allegedly. Now, two things for you to consider here. One, Christian nationalism is a thing that exists. It's not particularly pretty, and these people tend to have an anti-institutional theist worldview, and they want to live in a Christian version of what Iran has with their Islamist government. It's championed by some very ugly and fringe individuals. I'm not a fan. Number two, the claim, however, of this truly brain-dead journalist is that what unites Christian nationalists, not Christians, is the belief in natural law, or a doctrine of natural rights that comes from God and not government. This is like saying that what unites Christian nationalists is that they all wear shoes, and therefore we must be on the lookout for people wearing shoes. Oh, wait, shoes are the norm. Just as natural rights doctrine in the United States of America is the American norm. I'll demonstrate. Here's a much younger Joe Biden in 1987.
I believe all Americans are born with certain inalienable rights. As a child of God, I believe my rights are not derived from the Constitution. My rights are not derived from any government. My rights are not derived from any majority. My rights are because I exist. I have certain rights. That they're given to me and each of my fellow citizens by our Creator, and they represent the essence of human dignity.
You know, it is easy to forget that Joe Biden was once sentient and a somewhat interesting politician. But did you hear that? The radicalism, the scary stuff coming out of that man's mouth. We are surrounded, they say, by creeps who think that a man in the sky has given them the right to an AR-15 and to hurl death threats and racial slurs at strangers on the bus. Wrong. Natural law, while it is foundational to the Christian belief, it's a universalist concept that turns up in Judaism and Islam alike. It is also found in secular and pagan traditions, including but not limited to Greek and Roman Stoicism during the times of a very anti-Christian Roman Empire. This is a belief that there are just certain things about the world which are self-evident, including matters of the human heart, people. God does not care if you have an AR-15. He doesn't. That's not his business. But God does care that you would be willing to defend the defenseless and to protect others from evil. Our natural right is to self-defense and the defense of others, which is how you land at a Second Amendment in a world where humans have invented guns to menace and control others. The right to keep and bear arms extends from the right to self-defense. There is no natural right for a gun. Guns are not natural. Look, it's fine to have never stepped foot in a church before. It's also fine to have never been exposed in grade school to theology. But it is bizarre Bizarre for a politico-investigative journalist to not have investigated this concept and how it underpins American law and the expansion of liberty in every generation since 1776, one bit at a time. The left in America has been so hollowed out by their progressive secular education system that they no longer recognize even the sound of a conversation about natural law. They look at Christians as the radicals for saying such a thing could possibly exist, but the truth is that they are the radicals rebelling against not just our history, but the history of all of Western civilization. Do not forget it. Is the MSNBC crowd, are they prepared to recategorize Martin Luther King Jr. as a Christian nationalist in their next push when they try to rewrite the American history books covering the civil rights movement? In his words, we are governed by, quote, certain universal principles that are inherent in the moral structure of the universe, and these principles are as inescapable as the law of gravitation, unquote. Isn't that beautiful? There are moral laws that are as self-evident as gravity. You don't cheat, you don't murder or steal, and you don't segregate black and white children and arrange seating on the bus by skin color. MLK, he did his part to realign America with the natural law during the civil rights movement when he echoed the words of British scholar William Blackstone, who he said, this law of nature, it is binding all over the globe, in all countries, at all times. No human laws are of any validity if contrary to this. Martin Luther King, he expressed the exact same sentiment in his famous Letters from Birmingham Jail, that a human law is invalid if it contradicts natural law. And the most fundamental law of nature is that all people, regardless of the color of their skin, should be treated as equals by a civil government. Does the left know what they are doing here when they miscategorize Christian nationalism and degrade the idea of natural law? Do they know how far such a shift could set us back in terms of basic human rights, equality under the law, and individual liberty? I don't think that they do. They don't know what they are doing because they have lost the understanding of the words that they speak. They don't know, like the fish knows water, the country that they live in. I gotta say, do they know what they are doing? Forgive them, Father. They don't know what they do. I'm Stephen Kent. You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on WIBC. We'll be right back.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
All right, and thanks for staying with us through the break. I'm Stephen Kent, and you're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on WIBC 93.1. So, interesting news out of Indianapolis. So, in February, at the beginning of the month, the Indiana Senate unanimously passed a bill that would take additional steps to basically block the impacts of these things called CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Now, this moved through the Senate unanimously with a lot of support and is now in the House. And just yesterday, SB 180 passed unanimously through the House's Financial Institutions Committee. This is a bill that came from Senator Eric Koch, and it is going to essentially do the same thing. If it passes the House, it is going to ban CBDCs in the state of Indiana. Now, I was reading up on this just yesterday. The Times of Northwest Indiana, in their report, noted that lawmakers are going, to be moving to ban a, quote, non-existent currency. Very interesting. A non-existent currency, going out of their way many times in this snarky article by Dan Carden to make it sound as if Indiana is trying to ban ghosts or something. But CBDCs are real, people, and they could become more real and relevant to your lives. So let's discuss it. I am joined now by Yael Osowski, Deputy Director of the Consumer Choice Center, an expert on all things involving central bank digital currencies and crypto. Yael, thanks for joining me.
Yes, Stephen. Thanks so much for having me on. Delighted to talk to you.
Are lawmakers in Indiana trying to ban a non-existent currency as if there is no problem or anything to be concerned about as it concerns digital currencies?
Not at all. They're not chasing Casper here. The central bank digital currency, particularly in the United States, is something that has been discussed at length by the Federal Reserve. There are papers that they've written making arguments for it. They've sought feedback from various stakeholders in the banking sector, the finance sector. We've seen different versions of this introduced around the world. The European Union is really trying to push through their euro coin. The United Kingdom has discussed it. And we already have versions of it that do exist in places like the Bahamas and Nigeria and many other places that are aiming to look at their own central bank digital currencies. So they're not chasing ghosts. What they're really doing here in Indiana is taking good proactive measures that would stop implementation of a CBDC and at least protect Indiana residents from having this kind of what we believe is a sort of surveillance coin introduced. So I praise the steps. I think it's a great bill, and it's a very good step at the state level.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like something I would be inclined to support as well. We can talk a little bit about some of the federalist concerns regarding, national currency and a single state's ability to block it here in a bit. But, I guess just still to back up, let's really break down for people what central bank digital currency really means. I gather that it is a form of currency, money being distributed by the central bank. Okay, we're talking about the Federal Reserve. So it's different than Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies because it is backed by the U.S. government. But what is the purpose of this? Why do they want to go down this road? We have cash. We also have perfectly functional debit and credit cards backed by our banks. Why would we need this?
The argumentations around central bank digital currencies are seemingly made about convenience and the digital nature, when realistically, it's really tying it back to liquidity of the Federal Reserve. So the arguments that have been used and are implemented in the United Kingdom and throughout the European Union is that, look, we see all of these cryptocurrencies that exist in the ecosystem. People want to use things like Bitcoin because they can send money over the internet very quickly. They can do it with very low fees. We want to provide some kind of counterbalance to that. The CBDC idea is that, well, central banks right now are generally in the nature of printing money, and they've been doing a lot of it, $35 trillion of debt in the United States. And it's to provide a counterbalance to those digital currencies that exist and to say, hey, look, we can still be relevant using our fiat money system. That is the money that is guaranteed by the U.S. government. We can also be digital and cool and hip, and everyone can have wallets and implement this into their daily purchasing and savings routines. So that's the optimistic case. I think a lot of the opponents of it are those who look at what are the surveillance capabilities. We already know that whether it was the NRA or different people who were online performers, a lot of people are seemingly having accounts being shut down. There's a lot of debanking that's occurring. And
yeah, this has occurred with gun rights, right? I mean, there have been banks who have been expressed a willingness to not want to extend certain lines of credit if it is going to be getting purchased on things from firearms dealers. And then furthermore, the Cato Institute, they published a paper on this, and they just said very straightforward, nobody knows what you do with a $100 bill that you have in your wallet. Nobody is going to know besides you, your wife, and God. But when it comes to a CBDC, you can bet your bottom dollar that they can see everything that you do and that you spend your money on and make value judgments and maybe force value judgments on what you can and can't spend on.
Great person to read at Cato's, Nick Anthony, sort of a great voice on this. And that is mostly the concern, is that right now when you have your transactions, your trips to Starbucks or to the restaurant or to the grocery store, those are things that perhaps your payment provider, whether it be Visa or MasterCard, will have, and your bank. But now we have a central bank digital currency. That information will be logged directly with the Fed. And they could implement easily some kind of AI blacklist. You're not allowed to go to this store. We can't have you buying junk food. We can't have you buying vape pods. We can't have you doing many different things. And it's, the entire idea of money is to provide something of value that we can exchange, something that is representative of value. And we have these alternatives that do exist in the digital sphere because people are finding they just function better. And giving a government monopoly to that in the digital sphere is very dangerous. So I think at the state level, like you mentioned, there are constitutional questions. Can a state do this? What they have been able to do and articulate in Indiana and some other states like North Carolina is that we can actually just put the stop on our state agencies from touching or testing CBDCs. That's legal. That's constitutional. It's not going to stop the Federal Reserve's future plans on CBDCs, but it does give a little bit of protection at the state level, which is a good thing.
What happens if Congress actually comes around? This is like one of the most controversial items I've ever heard discussed. So I could not imagine Congress actually gathering together to pass a CBDC law, instituting it nationwide. But what if they did? What happens in Indiana? You can't really resist that, at least under the guise of, the Federalist Papers and the structure of the Constitution.
I think what it would do, which is very interesting, and we had early on in the American experiment, is that there would just be sort of a divided class of currencies that people use. There would be these CBDCs in circulation, but then there would be perhaps this old US dollar. Perhaps there would be other tokens or coins connected to gold. We used to have a lot of currency competition in the United States. It's really since we've had the Federal Reserve in 1913 that we've had this monopoly on money generation, issuance, and circulation. We used to have gold and silver and representative notes that were used by multiple institutions. We had state banks that were there. That was sort of Andrew Jackson's big thing. Killing the national bank was a big mantra of the 1800s. So there would be a lot of tests and stressors, but I actually have a lot of faith in the American people and our American system of government. Congress right now has no will to do this. It's not a very popular idea. It's something that Trump has talked about. It's something that he's definitely tried to put the blocks on. He said if he is elected, there's no way this will go through. So I think a lot of people have woken up, and it has to do a lot with the future of money, the future of banking, the future of payments. And I think that rests in the market and with innovators and not necessarily with the government.
We've got just here about 30 seconds. So just to close us out, what I think about immediately is what you mentioned earlier, which is the nature of control and centralization. If you were to have CBDCs, you could, in theory, enact things like quotas on different products that you can buy. You can actually have the government pick and choose which products are okay to have it, during a national emergency, during a climate emergency. They could cut you off from certain different kinds of products. And I have seen some prohibitionist types even suggest that CBDCs could be used to enact cleaner living and to cut people off from alcohol after certain hours or stop them from making purchases if they have a problem with alcohol. It's a pretty shocking lifestyle control mechanism.
Yeah, indeed it is. And, there are a lot of private actors that have been doing this and banks. And, we have a rule of law so we can kind of combat against it. But if it's embedded in the system and it's native to the currency, that's an entirely different issue. I really do applaud what's happening in Indiana. We need to have these measures. State legislatures are important to guaranteeing our freedoms and liberties. And I would continue to call on other states to very much do the same.
Yael Losowski, Consumer Choice Center, thanks so much for talking to us. We'll be right back after a quick break. You're listening to WIBC 93.1.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
And we are back. You are listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on WIBC. I am Stephen Kent, guest hosting this wonderful Friday for the great Tony Kinnett. I'm very happy to send you off into the weekend. It feels like this has been a long week, so I want to just wrap the show up on something of a lighter note, give you some recommendations on maybe how to spend some of your downtime, shows that you could be watching, things that you could be doing for entertainment. There's a really interesting piece over at The Hill running down a recent study looking at Nielsen ratings. So these are, of course, the ratings measurements of being able to see how many people are watching each kind of show. And as all of you know, the biggest show of the past year has been Suits on Netflix. Of course, this used to be on USA Today. It stars Meghan Markle. And once it got added to Netflix, this old legal drama from like 12 years ago, it used to be on USA, just absolutely exploded. More than 57 billion minutes were watched of Suits over the last year. I mean, that's crazy. 57 billion minutes of view time for Suits. Now, this show is not alone in being one of the most popular shows on television, but that happens to be a throwback to the early or mid 2000s. Old shows are the bread and butter of streaming. Now, when you kind of like get online, you spend too much time on Twitter, or, you're engaging, I think, with like conversations at the water cooler about what's on television. People tend to talk a lot about prestige shows. So the kind of most artsy programs, the biggest budget programs, the stuff that's buzzy and getting Hollywood talking sort of about itself. So that's like HBO, The Last of Us, Succession. There was an old line about the rise of Donald Trump. It was said by Joe Scarborough on MSNBC. He said, Trump is so popular because for the past 20 years, most Americans have been watching The Apprentice while we've all been watching Breaking Bad. And that's true, right? Breaking Bad, Mad Men, these are sort of prestige dramas that have a much smaller audience, but they rack up big awards during award season. But most people just really want to kick back and watch Grey's Anatomy, watch The Apprentice, watch Survivor, right? That kind of stuff. Just easygoing, casual television. So Suits sits atop this big listing by Nielsen of the most popular programs for the past year, followed by Bluey, animated kids show, not surprising at all. But then another throwback, NCIS, Grey's Anatomy, The Big Bang Theory, which, ran all the way to 2019, but is sort of a vestige of the mid-2000s. And here's a big one for our family, my household. My wife, daughter, love Gilmore Girls. Gilmore Girls ran from 2000 to 2007. This was like the show for, watching like a family kind of program about girls growing up in the 2000s, from the Bush administration all the way to the election of Obama. That show is a time capsule of time capsules. Next after that, Friends. Then Heartland, and then another one that's big in our house because it shares a lot of cast members from Gilmore Girls, Supernatural. Supernatural is in the top 10 shows. These are all programs from network television in the early 2000s, and with the case of Friends, of course, which is on this list as well, from the 1990s. Nostalgia and old television shows dominate television. Why is that? Why is it that old shows have this advantage over new content? I think it's probably familiarity, right? Like people kind of want to spend time on what they know. They don't want to waste necessarily an hour or two of their lives, but also just so much of modern television is dark. It's bleak. It's cynical. It's all like the dark side of human nature. And it's just like, it's seasons and seasons of plot that you always have to be involved in. But you can really drop in on Grey's Anatomy or Suits or Gilmore Girls anywhere. You can just drop right into the season, pick it up wherever it is, and enjoy. But it's not a surprise to me that at the top of modern television shows, you have Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso, kind of an anthology show. That show's very much like on Apple. It's like the Scrubs of modern day, like Scrubs that used to be on Comedy Central. It's very funny. It's an anthology show. You can watch any episode, and of course there are plot lines that move from episode to episode, but you don't have to have seen the last one to think that it's funny. But here's the thing. Ted Lasso is number one for these other more modern streaming shows, but it just pales in comparison to these old programs. I told you that Suits notched 57 billion minutes viewed in the last year. Ted Lasso is number one for more modern show. It notched 16 billion. The Mandalorian, which I view as a very popular show. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I assume that everyone has seen The Mandalorian. It feels like everybody has seen The Mandalorian on Disney+. But that only gets 12 billion minutes of view time in the past year, according to Nielsen. Nothing compared to the amount of people that are still watching The Big Bang Theory. We have a very bifurcated culture in America right now, where we used to have sort of a universal monoculture where everybody was watching the same things, talking about the same things when they went to work. And there was some social benefit to that. Like we all kind of had these shared things and a shared sense of what was popular. And now we all kind of live in our own little bubbles, very much curated by social media, but also our preference in streaming apps. And I do believe that that is overall good. We have so much entertainment and storytelling and culture that we can engage in that is more catered to our interests and our values. But of course, there's a cost. We lose these shared things. But I do want to stay kind of focused on the nostalgia factor, that it just blows me away how popular old shows are right now, because I study technology trends as well. And right now, Gen Z and Gen A, younger kids, are creating a revival around a lot of early 2000s culture. My Chemical Romance, old rock band, emo rock band from the 2000s, is experiencing sort of a renaissance with younger listeners today. You've also got a revival of landline phones happening right now that was reported recently in Axios. Landline corded phones are having a moment. People are buying them more en masse. And also, I have seen, even in my daughter's generation and friend circles, flip phones making a comeback. Nostalgia is this really powerful thing. I'm reading this book right now, and it's called Past Forward: How Nostalgia Can Help You Live a More Meaningful Life. And it's a pretty counterintuitive point made by the author Clay Rutledge. And he's arguing in this book that nostalgia is a thing that actually doesn't keep us stuck in the past, but actually directs us towards making a better future. We know the things that come from the past that made us feel warm and fuzzy inside and that we want to return to. And therefore, we then create those experiences for ourselves. We try to go towards those things. So in a sense, nostalgia doesn't keep us stuck in the mud. It motivates behavioral changes. It gets us to do different things. A sentimentality for the past and a sense of what we value from the past is what governs the kind of things that we are going to do in the future. There's this great line in the book, and it says, "The past isn't the true destination. It's just where we go to grab supplies for the trip that lies ahead." And when I think about what people are watching on television, I think about them as really longing for the tools and the ideas and the relaxed nature of old television. New modern TV shows are so tense, so dramatic, so dark, so cynical. You can't relax. You can't just rest and laugh, enjoy a joke. So anyways, I just thought that would be interesting to close out the week. Go watch some TV this week and join, I guess, the masses in watching throwbacks on Netflix and Paramount and all the likes. I know we will certainly be watching Supernatural in my household. All right, that's all it for the Tony Kinnett Cast. I've been your guest host, Stephen Kent. Tony will be back with you next week. I hope you have a great weekend. And until then, do me a favor, will you? Stay free.